Racism in the UK very much in the spotlight this week, from the world of football to the conviction of two men for the murder of the black teenager Stephen Lawrence, and a race row following a tweet by the MP Diane Abbott. Sky's Charlotte Lomas investigates whether Britain is doing enough to tackle it.
The death of Stephen Lawrence and his parents' subsequent campaign for justice brought racism into focus. It also led to the Macpherson Inquiry of 1999, a review which raised dark questions about race relations across Britain. Now, in 2012, how much has changed? Here in Birmingham, these youngsters gave us their answer.
I don't think racism's changed or stopped, because racism still exists, everywhere you go.
When I was younger, I didn't really take much notice of it because of your age, but as you grow along and with life experiences, you realize that it is a problem and it will never change.
But journey further south and the picture is much more positive. Tower Hamlets in East London is one of the most diverse boroughs in the UK, and one picked out by Macpherson as racially significant.
People don't feel like they're different colour, different race. So I don't feel even when I came in this country.
You've got whites, you've got blacks, you've got Asian people, and everyone seems to get along. There isn't any kind of racism around this area.
So many places have definitely changed. You can see people are becoming one. And I think this Stephen Lawrence story has now elevated people to see that racism is wrong in all aspects of life.
Since the 1990s, it hasn't just been the public attitude to race which has been challenged, but also institutional discrimination. The police service has been heavily criticised, but says it's serious about tackling racism within its ranks.
When you've got confidence levels at the same level as white people in communities, when you actually have the sort of results that we're getting in hate crimes, the approach that we now have to the way we investigate hate crime, particularly where a BME person is the victim, it doesn't stack up that that's an institutional failure. Of course, though, we still do have issues around stereotyping, around bias, that we need to continue to work with.
But some feel the police are not working hard enough, and that despite much expectation, the issues raised by the Macpherson Inquiry have never been addressed.
The community thought that things would have improved dramatically, but it hasn't, because there is police brutality. There is the issues around stop and search and racial profiling, which should stop now.
Opinions surrounding the level of discrimination in the UK remain divided. But it's clear that since the death of Stephen Lawrence, the people in Britain are now more confident addressing the issue of racism. Charlotte Lomas, Sky News.
Big question then, isn't it? Is Britain a less racist country than it was when Stephen Lawrence was murdered? Have the police learned the difficult lessons following on from the controversial Macpherson report? Joining us now is Mike Franklin, who is Commissioner for the South East region with the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Mike Franklin, welcome to you. How much of a problem do we still have? How far have we travelled?
Well, I mean, 13 years ago, the Macpherson inquiry report stated that deaths in custody and stop and search were two of the primary issues of concern. And if you look at the news, the current news, recent news and recent events, that's still obviously a serious concern. We've tried to address this by setting a policy, a position on stop and search, which requires the police to demonstrate fairness, effectiveness and public confidence in the use of those powers. But clearly, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, let's just look at a couple of recent stories, Mike. I mean, the one that's in the news today, a black footballer playing at Anfield. He is allegedly the victim of racist abuse. Don't want to in any way downplay what happened to him. He was clearly deeply upset by it, and quite rightly. But it looks like it was pretty much a lone voice. Time was not that long ago when John Barnes was playing. The bananas were landing on the pitch, all the rest of it. It is a rough measure of actually improvement, is it not?
Well, I mean, it depends very much on what your perception is. I mean, you know, one of the issues about stop and search, for example, is the perception of discrimination in the use of stop and search. And my view is that if you want to change people's perceptions, you have to change their experiences. people experience stop and search, they have very, very strong feelings about the use of stop and search. And we want the police service to justify and explain its use. Why is it, for example, that there is still disproportionality? I heard Dr. Richard Stone, a member of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry panel, talking about this last week. The disproportionality in stop and search is still a factor, hasn't gone down. And we want police officers to explain and justify their use of stop and search in a way that doesn't indicate discrimination.
You see, it's dangerous to draw too many conclusions from some of the emails we get here, but a couple yesterday when I was on, when we were covering the visit of the Anuj Bidve family into Salford, made the point that actually, far from not doing enough about perceptions of racism, sometimes police forces could be super sensitive to the charge of racism. And their argument was that, for instance, the visit of the family of Anuj Bidve to Salford served no investigative purpose, and yet it took the time of scores of police officers. A man had not only been arrested already, he'd been charged. So it's not as if there was an appeal for witnesses or anything like that.
Well, I mean, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry report was very, very clear about the need to be sensitive, to demonstrate respect and to understand the feelings of victims of crime. You know, I'm not saying for one moment that stop and search shouldn't happen, and the Lawrence inquiry report was clear about that. But there's no doubt in my mind that where you have police powers which don't require, for example, reasonable grounds for suspicion, there is a perception that those powers are used disproportionately against members of the black community. And if that is not the case, then the police need to justify and explain the grounds by which and for which they're stopping and searching people.
Just going back to what happened at Anfield, a lot of time, effort, money and voluntary effort's been expended on kick racism out of football, and a lot of people have invested a lot in that project and campaign. To what extent has it worked, do you think?
Well, I mean, clearly it makes a difference, but I think the story that you're talking about in Liverpool yesterday is an example that the work needs to continue, that the people that are involved in those campaigns must be supported, and their work should be valued and appreciated. It's not good enough just simply to look back over the last 13 years and assume that everything's better, when clearly, for many people, things haven't changed.
Are we getting any closer to having candid discussions about race that everybody can participate in, do you think, Mike?
Well, we're talking about it now. There's been a lot of discussion in the light of the convictions of two of the killers of Stephen Lawrence. I welcome that. I just think that when you talk about issues like police powers, we have to reflect on what was found in the course of the Lawrence inquiry and galvanise our efforts to try and improve the situation further. Stop and search, for example, is one of the issues that doesn't get referred to the IPCC. It doesn't meet the same sort of threshold as, for example, deaths in police custody. But nevertheless, it's the area of the greatest level of disaffection between young people and young black people and the police. It's the group of people that are least likely to make a formal complaint, and therefore we have to step up our efforts to try and improve that situation. Police officers need to justify the use of those powers. They need to understand that communities are concerned about this, and if they want to change people's perceptions of discrimination, they must change their experiences.
Just one final thought on the summer riots, Mike Franklin. I mean, just reading David Lammy's book recently about what the riots, the Tottenham MP, and he makes the point that they weren't race riots, that it was the racial divisions within the groups of rioters rendered it a pretty mixed bag. In a perverse way, is that a sign of progress?
Well, that's David Lammy's opinion. I mean, some people will say to you that if you speak to commentators as a result of those riots, that stop and search and the relations with the police played a big part in the way in which people felt this. I think that the fact that we're having a discussion is important, but people who have the luxury of not being regularly stopped and searched are always going to talk about things improving. If you're a young person and you get stopped and searched on a regular basis, you're not a criminal, you're not carrying a gun, you're not carrying a knife, you're not selling drugs, but you're continuously stopped and searched, you're going to have the feeling that you're being picked on specifically because of your race.
Mike Franklin, Commissioner for the South East Region with the Independent Police Complaints Commission. Mike, thanks very much. Much more coming up after the break.